Hey everybody, this is Jordan Tremaine and welcome back to another episode of Jordan Tremaine Book Reviews. And today, this is a fun one. I love it when this happens, but you read a really good book and then it refers you to another good book. And today we're going to look at that second book, which is The Crowd by Gustav LeBoN. Okay, so The Crowd, that's the name of this book. Boom, boom. Pretty small book, no pictures, but it has a subtitle. Subtitle is A Study of the Popular Mind or Crowd Psychology. And this guy, Gustav LeBoN, this book was, it was referenced in Maps of Meaning. I did a book review on that. If you want to go check that out, I'll put the link in the description. Go check that out. That's one of my favorite books of all time. Very difficult, but oh my God, so worth it. If you could chop through that book, woo, snaps is good. But we're talking about this book today. So The Crowd, it's kind of a short and sweet book. It was written in the 1890s by this guy named Gustav LeBoN, and it talks a lot about crowds and how crowds think, and that when people come together in crowds, they think differently than they normally would as individuals, which is weird. But LeBoN makes a good case for this, and he is like a psychiatrist or a psychologist, and he's done some other cool things. He's like a French dude, which you kind of pick up because like every other example he uses is the French Revolution. So it's like his name's LeBoN, and he makes all these references to the French Revolution, which was like really, really important at that time. Like in the 1890s, it was like the world wars hadn't happened yet. It was like a really big war at the time in Europe. So, reference away. But I think this book is interesting because it takes a look at human behavior from a chair that we're not used to sitting in, from a vantage point or point of view or perspective that we're not used to looking at. And that's people as crowds being their own creative, different, unique thing than just the individuals that make up that crowd. LeBoN goes a lot into how this affects how people think, how people don't necessarily do a lot of thinking when they're in crowds, and what he means by a crowd. A lot of times people start explaining something, but they won't define key terms, which makes their whole explanation a little confusing. But LeBoN goes through great extents to try and define a crowd and then enumerate like different types of crowds. And then what happens in different types of crowds, how they're related, how they're different. And I thought it was really interesting. The only thing that I think bothered me about this text is it reads like it was translated into English with Google Translate. And that's probably just my copy. I probably just picked a bad translator. Somebody should have written this out better. Or sometimes there's concepts or ways of phrasing stuff in one language that don't translate well into another language. So I don't know, whoever translated this, I'm glad they did because I got to read it. Just a few passages felt very like somebody whose first language was English would not have written it that way. But it's a dated piece. It's over 100 years old and it's been translated from another language. So I still understood it, so it wasn't a big deal. The whole book is relatively short. See, look how thick it, oh, let me squeeze it down. It's not even that thick. And it's like 120 pages, but it did take me like 2 weeks to get through because I had to think through a lot of this stuff. It reminded me a lot of The Wealth of Nations, which I did a book review on a long time ago. I'll put a link in the description. There you go. I get that wrong like every time. But it reminded me that where it's just a guy that's talking about his thoughts and how people act and how the behavior he's observed kind of makes sense to him. And it's not trying to sugarcoat it. It's not trying to say it in a pretty way. He's saying, hey, this may not be the prettiest thing, or it may not be what you expect, but this is what I observe and this is what makes sense to me. In the case of The Wealth of Nations, I think Adam West is the guy that wrote that. Adam Smith. In this book, Adam Smith's talking about the economy, and this is a much thicker book, has a lot of other things, but this, a good book. But in this book, we're talking about crowds, but kind of the approach is the same, where it's like no nonsense. Some of the like behind the curtain, like, really, is that true? I would never have thought that. Or I don't want to believe that's true. People are supposed to be good people. It's like, okay, how do people really act? What is really going on with people's behavior? And one of the interesting things I thought about this book, The Crowd, was that LeBoN acknowledged that knowledge of this kind of psychology, this crowd psychology, could be used to make dictatorships. It could be used to control people. It could be used to sway crowds. But crowds can often be very dangerous things. We hear in modern terms, I don't think we talk about crowd psychology. We've changed the name to mob mentality. But mobs can be very dangerous, and knowing skills and tools like this could save your life, or it could help you to calm a crowd down or to help them realize different things, because talking at crowds with logic may not help. Trying to tell a crowd to change its mind may not help. But there's different techniques in here that can help you to interface with crowds, become an orator. And just like anything, it could be used for good or evil, whatever those things are, depending on your morality or how you think, what your perspective is. It could be used for a lot of good things or a lot of bad things, or a lot of whatever things. But the point is that there, I think, is useful knowledge in here that's good to know about groups of people that can save you a lot of grief and headache. And why I explained this so clearly and they didn't even care. And if they did care, it would help them so much, but they don't care. Why don't they want to listen to me? Maybe there's some psychology going on that you may not be aware of. So I don't want to get too much into it. There's a lot of good examples in the book. I want you to read the book. These book reviews I do, which you should subscribe to. Click the like button and comment and tell me how great I am at orating and stuff like that. But these book reviews I do are not supposed to tell you what the book is about. It's supposed to give you an idea of whether or not it's worth reading. And so I don't like to go into a lot of the details. Yes, I did read the book. Some people in the comments are like, you didn't even read that book. I did read the book. I read this book. And I read this book. Yes, well, I listened to this book. But I read it with my ears. It took me a long time. But I'm purposely not stating a bunch of facts or going through the plot line and stuff, because you should go through it. I'm trying to give you enough so that you can be like, oh yeah, I want to read that book, or oh, that book doesn't sound that good. And maybe inspire some other people to read. But in this case, this book I think has a lot of interesting ideas about crowds that you may not expect. It gives you a lot of examples. And yes, it's from the 1800s, even though it's the late 1800s. So some of it doesn't sound appropriate, or some of it sounds dated, because, LeBoN missed out on the last 100 years of psychology knowledge, because he wrote this in the 1890s. So if you're reading this and you're like, oh, well, the DSM-5 says this, so LeBoN, I'm going to cancel you. He didn't know even probably about the DSM-1. I don't even know when that was up. But I think if you put yourself in the place where you can try to appreciate what he's trying to bring, even though it's a little bit dated, it can be really helpful. And aside from, and maybe, now that I'm thinking about it, this book was not recommended to me by the book Maps of Meaning by Jordan B. Peterson, even though that was a really good book. What really happened was I read Maps of Meaning, and Maps of Meaning started talking a lot about fascism. And I was like, I have an idea of fascism, but I've never really dug into it. So maybe I don't know as well as I should know, because Maps of Meaning was like a really intense book. So I started looking into fascism, and I watched this pretty long video on YouTube about fascism. And this book was brought up in that video. So it did kind of tag from Maps of Meaning, but I don't think there's a direct reference to it. But what that video was saying was this book, The Crowd by Gustav LeBoN, was one of the things referenced in the early creation of fascism, because fascism was a political experiment like any other social system, like socialism or democracy or dictatorshism or fascism or whatever. Those are all like some dude or group of people were like, hey, I wonder if the world could work if we did stuff like this. And then they try it out. And that's what's happening in America right now. We're trying out a version of democracy to see if it works. The European Union is trying out a version of democracy to see if it works. South Korea is trying out a version of dictatorship to see if it works. And people have their different opinions about it. But this idea of crowd psychology was instrumental in the development of the hypothesis of fascism. And I was trying to understand what fascism was. And so I started going back into the roots of like, okay, where did it come from? Who thought of this? What was the intention behind it? So I'll put a description to that video in the link. I'll put a link to that video in the description below. And I hope you watch it because it's really interesting. And that's kind of what led me to this book. So book to video to book, that's kind of the reference chain. All good sources. I think they're worth reading and worth understanding, because if you have any mind to be adroit or knowledgeable politically, to have political opinions, to go and vote and stuff like that, which I hope you do, especially if you're in the United States, because that directly affects me more than most other countries because I'm a United States citizen. So I hope you like read and vote and educate yourself and stuff like that. But if you're going to do that, and develop opinions, I hope you do your best to get educated opinions. And understanding different systems of government is really good for that. And this book is one of the texts that was used, apparently, to develop a system of government. And I'm not at all saying I'm a fan of fascism. I'm not saying that. I'm saying it's important to understand different systems of government so you can be educated and know how to vote good. And understanding democracy, understanding communism, understanding fascism. Why is fascism bad? What is fascism? Why should we avoid it? If I know about it, then I could be like, hey, what's that? That's like fascism. What are you doing that? Or if I know what democracy is, I can be like, hey, that's democracy. Do more of that. If I believe that way. So I'm a big advocate of educating yourself, even in things that you may not necessarily practice, because educating yourself in a wide variety of different things gives you good perspective and the ability to make good decisions. So, off my soapbox for today. The book is called The Crowd, a study of popular mind, a study of the popular mind, or crowd psychology, or mob mentality, if you want to call it that, by Gustav LeBoN. This book's a banger, even though the translation was like, the ideas in here, whoo, good. So this has been Jordan from Maine with another book review. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you later.